Morning, everyone. Happy to be here. And I have never given a talk with a real-time graphic being created, so I'm really excited to see what that turns out to be. So as Frank said, I'm currently CISO at Elastic, been there just over 6 years. And I'm going to talk today just about the journey that we have taken in that 6.5-year time frame, what we had thought about as we started to put the program together, where we are today, and where we're looking to go in the future. Frank already gave this description, so I won't go into details, but I do have, as Frank mentioned, a law degree, accounting degree, and a CPA, licensed to Texas law. And what I find is that gives me a really unique perspective in security in working across all of those three functional areas. And you'll see some of that as I talk about the journey at Elastic. So prior to Elastic, I spent 13 years in financial services. Decided I wanted to get back into the tech space. Been there for a while earlier in my career, wanted to get that financial services experience, and then decided, all right, let's get back into the fun land of startup and tech. So May of 2018, accepted opportunity at Elastic and went in, and a couple of things led me to choose Elastic. One, the technology was fantastic. Second, it was a fully distributed global remote organization from its inception. So long before the pandemic had all of us working remotely. So from a security control perspective, that gave me some really interesting challenges that I had never faced before. Also an open source focused organization, again, some different challenges. Certainly when you're looking at what your intellectual property is that you need to keep, our code is open, so that takes away a significant focus of a lot of programs. So when I walked in the door, I had really three key objectives that were handed over. One, just establish a strategic security program. Elastic was getting ready for its IPO, which would happen in about 7 months after I started, but also planning to grow and expand as a business and mature itself and the customers and the use of the technology and its customers. And doing so, establishing customer trust. So starting to get all the basic certifications. But lastly, just providing some thought leadership and some examples and some recognition. One, ideas on a security program in a globally distributed, fully remote organization, but also using our own technology. So you'll hear through this, I talk a bit about Elastic's technology, Elastic's products, in the context of how we're using them internally in our own program, in the scope of the journey, not a sales presentation. So from my time in financial services, I walked in with a couple of key tenets that I wanted to focus on with the Elastic program. One, a lot of focus on compliance, certainly in the highly regulated industry of financial services, and often find that battle a really hard balance to make in making decisions and doing things from a compliance perspective and doing things from a security perspective. And at the time, there's a lot of overlap in what those are. As you'll see when I talk about current state, that overlap is quickly diverging. So I wanted to really focus on, let's build and establish a program that focuses on security where compliance is a byproduct. So that was first and foremost one of the foundation components. Second was focused on risk and really utilizing risk to drive priorities, drive resource allocation. And so first and foremost was then how do we define what is risk at Elastic? And how do we approach that, and how do we use that to make our priority decisions? And then I wanted to look kind of big picture. What do we want to be those kind of guiding principles, those North Stars that we're working towards? And so we knew going in first we needed to build a foundation, and that would take a couple of years. And then getting into, all right, let's integrate everything, let's automate, let's put all the pieces together. And then 6.5, 7 years ago was some of the initial conversations on behavior analytics. How do we understand what's happening in the environment and what actions do we need to take? And then is there any way we can do that dynamically, getting to that self-defending environments that we always love to talk about and really want to achieve? And recognizing that in different stages of the company, as threat landscape changes, as business changes, this is a bit of a circular journey. So in one area, we may be in behavior analytics, something changes, and we're back to reestablishing the foundation. And so using this as our guiding principles from an overall program roadmap perspective. So we landed on, from a program, these key tenets. One, InfoSec provides the guardrails. So looking at the 3 lines of defense model, that was heavily utilized in financial services, looking at the InfoSec program at Elastic as part of that real second line of defense, not being in the day-to-day hands-on operational aspects of security from a functional perspective. We provide the guardrails, provide the policies, the standards, the controls, provide the monitoring and the response. We're really focusing on that everyone at Elastic has a critical role in security, from engineers in developing secure products and solutions to everyone on the enterprise business practices in securing customer data, securing employee data, and describing our approach as a distributed federated approach. Wanted to create a program that aligned with how Elastic operated as a company. Teams were very empowered. Teams were able to make the decisions what's best for them. And we didn't want to come in and create a security program that was antagonistic to that approach. So we wanted to align with how the company was operating. And then benchmarking against the NIST 2.0 standard, the piece that's covered up there with the graphic, or NIST CSF. So putting all of that into a graphic that we would show to the company and other, as we're going through compliance certifications, this is graphically what that approach looks like for us. And that we're providing the risk management, policies and standards for the guardrails. We have our governance and assurance that makes sure things are working as we expect. And then all the day-to-day operations in the middle. We have a platform security team, we have our IT team, product security, and then all of our supporting business functions and engineering. So this is kind of, after the first few months, this is how we were going to move forward and operate. So we've got a general program foundation and focus. But one thing that I've learned over the course of my 25 plus years in security, well, I should say, I didn't start this way. I started that technology was going to solve everything. And it solved some things, but didn't solve everything. And then it was like process. Process with technology is going to solve everything. And I was like, no, not really. So then it's people. Finally got to what the reality of the world is that people are key, people are core, people are critical. And one thing I really liked about Elastic is the Elastic source code. So the source code is kind of the outer rounds, and if you search for Elastic source code, you'll find them on the website. But there really are aspects of just how to behave that we try to achieve amongst ourselves and with each other at Elastic. So using that as a base and overall experiences, put together kind of our operating philosophy from an InfoSec perspective. So we have the Elastic source code at a high level that provides a broader framework, and then more specifically, here's how we want to operate day to day. I want to highlight a couple of these. One, radical innovation, just really being comfortable, challenging how we do things. Is there a different way we could do it? Is there just something that, it may not be something we've ever heard of before, but we think it'll be effective for what we need to achieve. And to have the safety and the comfort to try something, and it's okay to fail. And that moving into deliberate resilience. Things are going to happen. Let's be prepared, let's be ready. We're not trying to prevent everything from occurring, that's impossible. But we want to be ready, we want to build environments and systems that are easily maintainable, easily recoverable, can withstand interruptions. And then relentless iteration. Everything's changing so quickly. Let's just move forward. Let's try not to paralyze ourselves in defining what is perfect. In standard, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let's just take one step, take 2 steps, take 3 steps. And before you know it, you look back a year from now, you've made significant progress. It doesn't always feel that way because you're taking these small incremental steps. So making sure that we're pausing and taking that time to reflect just to see how far we've come on our journey. Pervasive and distributed security is everywhere. All elasticians have a role in security. It's embedded in every individual role, function. But then getting to some of the things from lessons and experience that we've all had working in security teams. Lastly, the user obsession, just really focusing on what is the experience of the user? What is their world? Attempting as best we can to put ourselves in their shoes, but really looking at it from the context of, if there's a decision that we can make that will either make the users' lives easier and make things more simple and straightforward for them, and it will make our jobs harder, or something that will make our jobs harder, more time-consuming, or easier, but harder on the user, we'll always lean towards, we'll always make the decision what's best for the user, and take on that burden ourselves and not put that burden and that extra focus and work on the user. I think one of the biggest ones that I've really focused on is unexpected transparency. I've worked in security teams where it's a black box. You can't talk about it. Everything's behind a closed door. And for me, my perspective is that creates just a bit of unknown, a bit of, well, security's over there. The security team's going to take care of everything that's security related. And that's not how we need to operate in today's world. And so there's very little that is truly information that is not available or something that cannot be shared. And so we're open. We have a lot of information that's just out on the company wiki. We send out weekly emails. We share anonymized examples of things that happen, events that occur within the organization, and just really being transparent and sharing and bringing folks along the journey with us and letting them see and understand what's happening. And then using that unexpected transparency just to help advocate and educate, continue to educate the organization, continue to provide examples of what's happening in the threat landscape. As Elastic's business has evolved into new business lines and new product lines, what does that mean? And how does that change our security posture? Oops. So that to put all that together, that was about 12 months of building the foundation, starting to hire the team. There were 3 folks when I joined. One was an engineer working to help the security team. There was a manager and a security analyst. They had put together policies and standards framework. And so over the next 6.5 years, we built up the basics of our foundation, going through that roadmap journey. We went from a team of 3 to today we're a team of 42 across different areas, and I'll touch on those as I go through this. We standardized our program, as I mentioned before, on the NIST cybersecurity framework, and with 2.0, govern component being added. So every couple of years, we benchmark our program with an independent third party just to see where we are on the maturity scale. Current state of the overall Elastic technical environment, we have about 3,200 employees in 44 countries. We are cloud native, so all of our SaaS services that we sell to customers runs on AWS, Azure, GCP. All of our enterprise business systems are all SaaS. And from a scale, we're ingesting over 150 terabytes of data daily, about 600 gigabytes of just endpoint data. And we have, probably today, it's over 500,000 endpoints that we are monitoring, protecting, and securing. So we're operating at a pretty decent scale from an organizational perspective. In today's environment, there's 3 main objectives that we focus on. First and foremost, keeping Elastic secure. That is our #1 job. Everything else takes second priority to that. Building customer trust at scale. How do we continue to evolve and grow and maintain both the certifications that we have, the certifications that we need to gain, moving into new industries and just new regulations that are coming. But how do we do that also while maintaining our security? And this is what I mentioned earlier. I'm really seeing an expanding divergence between what you need to do as an organization to be secure and what you need to do as an organization to be compliant. And especially as we're moving into much more cloud security, and focusing on that realm, it takes time for regulations to catch up. And what I mentioned before, this is where the law degree, that interpretation. So interpreting regulations to understand what the initial objective and initial purpose was, and how do we then apply that into a more SaaS-focused cloud security environment. And then lastly, be customer zero. What that is being very early users of our products inside of Elastic. Often we're running build candidates, release candidates, helping find bugs and issues so they can get fixed before they get out to customers. Back to that deliberate resilience. Not something we necessarily wanted to test, but we wanted to make sure we built our overall kind of monitoring environment, knowing that we were going to be running sometimes potentially buggy product as we're in early release candidates. We wanted to be able to just kind of blow up the whole environment and everything still be working. We accidentally tested that one day when we deleted all of our workloads. But we rebuilt everything in a couple of hours, didn't lose any data on the inbound ingestion side. So a happy test, not one that we planned, but glad to see that what the team put together worked. So current state of what we're utilizing, one, in looking at that compliance to security and really focusing on security over compliance that I talked about at the very beginning as one of our foundational tenets. We defined what we call our elastic controls framework, which is just what are those controls as a company that we want to have in place. Minimum bar is what we need for all of our certifications, but we go above the minimum in pretty much everything. Just as a company, what do we want to do? What do we need to do? And we set all of that, and then as much as possible, we move it anything that we can into as code. So we have our compliance as code that helps feed configurations and APIs, think of Terraform, and moving things into that sense helps feed all of our audits that we need to do from a certification perspective. And it just gives us one picture to focus on. We really try to stay away from when I'm doing this thing for the certification, this thing for the certification, this thing for security. It's like, this is what we need to do as Elastic. The one caveat to that is FedRAMP. Sometimes they're just things you need to do for FedRAMP. Asset inventory. One of the hardest things is just what does your environment look like? And we have a lot of blog posts out on the site on more details on how we thought about all of this. So we look at assets as a very broad definition. Yes, it's your employee laptops as endpoints. It's the workloads. It's the environments across our clouds. But it's also API keys, critical digital components that also need to be tracked and understood. And put all of this together. And this is the base that feeds in all of our continuous control monitoring, contextual information for our SOC and monitoring. But as best we can, we try to keep that inventory updated. And of course, the hardest part is, how do you know what you don't know? So as best we can, we try to get some checkpoints into other aspects of the organization, like finance, to make sure that if we're paying something that we don't know about, that we get that addressed. Being a product company, certainly one, open code, now we're back to open source. Our code is publicly available, has been for a very long time. And customers, potential customers, take that, run security scanners across the code, and send us the reports, thousands of lines of reports, and wanting responses for each statement. So what we started to do a couple of years ago is when that really started and has ramped up significantly. As we use tools like Qualys and Sneak and a few others, and we pull all of that data, and we work with the engineering teams to create our security statements, as in, this, while we use this library, it's not exploitable, we don't use that component, it's not in the call path of the code, or we're going to update it in this next version, or it has been updated. And we put all of that into a system and made that searchable initially for the security team. We then made it available internally to the support team. So most of these were coming through customer support tickets. We're in the process now of making that directly available to customers, and then our next step will be to make that directly available to the internet so anyone can look at it. And what we've really seen over the last couple of years is a significant shift in what is accepted responses. Before, it was okay to say, yes, this library, we're using it, we're not using the function, we're not calling the path that has the vulnerability. That's not sufficient anymore. It's a focus on as many clean reports as possible. So if you're running the library, update it. And been working very closely with engineering. That's a mindset shift from an engineering team's perspective from what they had been focusing on. So we've been doing a lot of work in that area to help them with automating and understanding upgrades and container security and all of that. Which leads into vulnerability management. We use Qualys as our standard vulnerability management, contextualized data. with information from vulnerability database, pull in data from our asset inventory. And we pull all of that together, and we're heavy users of Tines from an automation perspective. And we've worked with each team across the company. And each engineering team operates a little bit differently, so they also have their own processes. But we worked with them to define, how do you want to receive this data? Do you want it to go into GitHub? Do you want it to go into Jira? Do you want it to go through an email? And have worked to create separate processes that work within the structure of how that team works. So it's embedded and easier to embed in their day-to-day processes. What it's also done for us is it has extrapolated using the information from the source of the information. So we could replace any of our vulnerability source components. So we could replace Qualys, and it wouldn't change the downstream work streams of the teams utilizing the data. Threat detection, everyone's favorite subjects. So this is SOC, standard security monitoring response. Of course, we are using Elastic's SIEM in our endpoint security product as our SIEM. But we really focus on a couple aspects of how do we minimize the hands-on or say manual activity of the analysts. And we continue to focus on that. We'll see in some of the future step things. One of the key things that we've done here is detection as code. We can write our detections. They're in GitHub. So we have all of the history, all the change history, push them out. One, to remove manual human errors as much as possible when you're copying, pasting, or entering rules across multiple systems. Also gives us just the change management. Now we have the history, we have the why. Why was this rule created? What is its purpose? What is it really looking at? I've been through many SIEM changes where we looked at all of these rules. I don't even know why these are here. I'm not sure what they're looking at. I don't know if I can take them out. So trying to avoid getting into that situation. We really focus also on distributing alerts as much as we can between Tines as automation, Slack as the standard channel for communication, trying to push out initial response as much as possible into the day-to-day work streams. So it's not just our SOC analysts that are working through that. And so this is one example of the distributed alerting that we have in place. We focus on, one, getting in front of the user with an explanation. So this is an example. We use Okta as our IDP. If you change your multi-factor or implement, make some adjustments to your MFA configurations, you'll get an alert from Slack asking if that was you. If it was, great, everything gets automatically closed out. If it wasn't, it gets immediately escalated to an analyst to focus on. It's something to investigate. One thing we found here, VPNs provide some very unique IP addresses. That's an example of just how folks are engaged. They see something come through, I'm not working in that location, let's investigate. Usually, luckily, we find out it's a VPN endpoint. So getting into the future and where we're going with the program. And I'll have some time for questions. I wanted to leave a lot of time for folks just to answer questions that they have. So broadly, we took some time in the past few months to reflect what challenges have we been facing and where do we want to go? And this is the summary results of what we really have discovered and what our focus areas will be for the future. One, continued increasing scale. Had the scale that I showed before, we have in private beta right now our serverless offering of the Elastic Cloud. So doubling of our cloud environments and differing approaches. So how do we incorporate all of that at scale into our processes? While we have a risk-based prioritization focus, we have inbound activities from many different sources. And we didn't have a good way to pull all of that together, understand what it all meant from a risk perspective. So we were making risk-based priority decisions, but we aren't comfortable that we have all of the risks within that process. So that's one thing we wanted to work on. And no formalized patterns for output. We do in a few key places, but no common, this is where it goes, this type of information for this group, this type of information for this group. And just the day-to-day, things change very quickly in security, whether it's threat landscape, alerts that we need to react to, business changes. Suddenly we buy a new company that we need to integrate and adjust all of our plans and roadmaps. How does that impact roadmaps and what we need to do? So as with any security team, we create fun acronyms. So what the team's calling this now is they call it SWARM. And all of this is a very massive, pull everything together, output, alerts, control configurations into one place and feeding them into the appropriate avenue for which they need to go, whether that's through identity, cloud posture, security posture management, into monitoring, and then leading all of that into our risk analysis and into our roadmap and project planning, and then understanding it from that perspective. What are the priorities? What do we need to do? So this is something that we just started that we're working on defining and how all of the components fit together. But that's part of kind of the future of where we're headed. A couple things in threat intelligence. AI. I hadn't mentioned AI yet, but I couldn't get through a presentation on security in today's environment without mentioning AI. So we talk a lot about what the future of AI could bring, and I'm very optimistic, and I think there's a lot of change that it can bring to security teams and a lot of benefits. But I don't want to ignore the very basic benefits that it can provide. So one of the things that our threat intelligence team has started using LLMs for is, they have their massive threat intelligence reports. They go through them, read them, but then they need to write kind of summary reports to send out. And it's time consuming to go through and understand how should I summarize this report for execs. So they've just started using ChatGPT to go, hey, upload a report, summarize this report. And that has saved, in some cases, 8+ hours of time per report. So that's time gained, not just focusing on reading and summarizing a report. They're then able to focus that time on, well, what does this report mean for Elastic? What are things that we need to focus on? Gives time to do more detailed technical analysis, more time for discussion on potential remediation activities, threat indicators, changes in our monitoring or control structure. And so just don't want to minimize some of the small things that AI can help us with today. Another thing that we're working through is just continuing to expand and automate from a monitoring perspective. So also pulling out indicators of compromise from threat reports, automatically feeding that into our, we use OpenCTI as our threat intelligence system, and then feeding that into our monitoring rules through our detections as code. But all of that without any manual involvement. Whereas today, reading reports, copy pasting, telling the analysts and the detection engineering team, hey, we need to update this rule. All of that is in process of being automated, utilizing LLMs as a starting point for the extraction. From a threat detection perspective, I mentioned behavior analytics at the very beginning as one of the kind of journey tenets. And as we've continued to evolve, both as a company, as a program, as a security overall threat landscape, the scale, I was talking about this when I was in financial services, and the speed, scale, complexity has only continued to increase. And that's really pushing to create a mindset shift in our detection engineering and our SOC, moving away from a focus of discrete detection rules to more of a focus on behavior analytics. So instead of defining these are all the things I want to be alerted on if they happen in my environment, not realistic in today's world, doesn't scale. We can't anticipate everything that's going to happen. So wanting to focus on behavior analytics, cross-entity analytics, really understanding what normally happens in the environment and what's changed. And so we highlight and focus our investigations on what's changed. And we don't know the source. It could be an operational change, could be a process change, could be something malicious, whether external or insider. But it focuses ourselves on there is something happening in the environment that we need to focus on and need to investigate and understand, versus today's world, just that ongoing wheel of create a detection rule, false positives, tune false positives, and really moved away from the intent of monitoring and really understanding what's happening in the environment. So with the behavior analytics, augmenting that with canary detections, there are things that you don't want to see happening in your environment. Focus on those. There are things that you can put in your environment that if accessed, if scanned, if read, that should never happen. Those are your canaries, those are your red flags, investigate immediately. So really putting very high fidelity into those discrete detections that you utilize. So this is an area that we're focusing on in our broader threat detection perspective going into the next couple of years. Touched on the behavior-focused detections. And I've been talking about this piece for a while. Technologically, this is where I think AI comes in and can really help. So I'm excited about that. And then overall, for me, security is all about data these days and just understanding what's happening. And AI technology, while not necessarily able to do it today, I think there will be significant benefits in the future. And AI being able to really analyze and understand your data at scale, those pieces and patterns that just as humans, we aren't able to recognize, either because they're nuanced or just because there's so much information that we're analyzing that we miss it. And so that's the first piece where I really feel that AI and security analytics will benefit in helping us much better understand what's happening in our environment. And then allowing defenders to use AI, I think one, it will allow us to move into the behavior patterns. We've been able to do it in isolated, like watching someone's logins, watching a device's processes. But what I'm really excited about and focused on with AI is the ability to aggregate a lot of that information. So not just this is what this workload is doing, and this is what this user is doing, and this is where this API key is being used, but being able to put all of that together and recognize that this interaction is always happening, and suddenly this interaction changes, and now it's calling out somewhere else. It's a red flag to investigate, and that's the next level that I feel that AI and then in the future could get even better. Much faster, much faster analytics, responses, and then being able to be stronger and just being able to really create actionable recommendations, actionable components of your program to be able to know where to focus and where to move forward for your environment. And at the end of the day, I do think AI, Gen AI today, AI in the future, can tip the balance to give defenders a bit of a step ahead from where we are today. And in doing that, I think because it will help us really understand the contextual aspects of our environment. What we're really challenged with today is bringing all of disparate pieces of information together. That's where AI is really helpful. So in understanding behavior, bringing in that environment context, and then being able to immediately, if that's something you choose in your organization, to take action to help either defend or mitigate. And so for me, I do believe in the future, not today, 5 or so years from now, I do believe that we can get to self-defending environments and that something could be happening, making configuration changes, making adaptations to controls. And that's something we've been talking about for many years in security. We thought SOAR was going to fix all of that. SOAR hit the same scalability problems. It was still reliant on human interaction to make changes to configurations. But I'm optimistic and very excited about what the future holds. And I am looking forward to the future of security. And what I want to do personally is 10 years from now, I'm going to look back and look at this as a bit of the dark ages of security and just wonder how we could be successful at anything, because the world has changed so quickly and we feel that we can be more effective than we are today. So with that, thank you. I have some time for questions. And thank you, Frank, for inviting me. Enjoy the opportunity.
That's great. Thank you so much.